Good morning. Drawing with a grid. For this, we are going to be looking at the same proportions, and we're going to be starting from one square at a time. And here I'm drawing a set of eyes that I was working on in Sketchbook, and I'm following the part of the image with my eyes here, just one square at a time. I'm going to be moving my pencil along the different proportions of just one square at a time, and I'm using observation. I'm carefully observing what is the shape, placement, and direction of every square. Now I'm drawing a little bit darker so you can see it on the camera, but what you really want to do is draw lightly at first, because that's what's going to allow you in the future to make corrections if you have to. Now I'm looking at the proportions of each square, and drawing lightly also allows me to make those corrections, like I said, as I need them. Once I'm done drawing one of the squares, I'm going to move on to a different part of the image and so on. Even with light shades, I'm going to mark them on my page so that I know where each of the items of the picture falls. Looking at an eye, for example, I'm not only going to draw the shapes that are noticeable, like the edge of the eye or the curve of the face, but I'm also going to include some areas where there may be some shadows and there may be some blending where I have to include that. I'm avoiding drawing or shading anything right now, and I'm trying to avoid making really dark shades. Later on, I will be able to add those shades. Right now, I'm just trying my best to stay focused, looking up constantly at the photograph to get an accurate drawing. That's what's most important in this activity, is to get an accurate drawing. And again, to do that, I want to make sure that this is not too dark. My eyes are constantly looking up at my image, and now I'm just going to start shading just lightly, hatching and cross hatching the areas that are going to be slightly darker. This is easy to identify because I've already got it all mapped out in the right place. If you don't have it mapped out and you've missed some details, you can always go back and add those details into it. But I'm still trying to keep my best accurate drawing by looking up at my image constantly. There is no improvement in drawing if you're not observing closely. You're staying focused with it. Now I'm beginning to identify some of the areas that are a little bit darker than others. And I want to continue to start adding some of the light shading in the work. Some of those edges are blurry edges, and some of those edges are dark, sharp edges. So I'm constantly asking myself, internally asking myself, is this the right place? Is this the right shape? Is this the right value or shade for this object? And if it's not, I will have to make that darker or lighter depending on what it is that I'm looking at. This is part of being visually literate. In other words, do you understand what you see? And can you accurately place it where it needs to be? For example, here I have a dark part of the eye, and as I look up, I see that this is very dark, so I'm not afraid of adding a lot of value here yet. I'm still keeping it somewhat controlled here. The beauty of using your Chromebook is that you can zoom in one square at a time. So if I'm focusing on the eye, for example, I could just focus on that one part of the eye and look really closely at all of the details. For example, here I have some light areas, some medium value areas, some medium light areas, and then some very light areas like this highlight in the eye. So I can zoom in and be very focused on just one square at a time. Now that I've got everything mapped out, I can focus on just the one square and really get my details going for that one square. And at this point, you can still make corrections because you've drawn it very lightly and you're under control. As an artist, that's very important that you're constantly under control of your tools and your process. This is time consuming only if you allow it to be. What I mean by that is if you rush the process and you're not observing carefully, then it's not going to look accurate. But if you're focused, this process is actually very fast. And like I said, one square at a time, just focus on just one square at a time. You will be more successful in your drawing. Adding those very subtle changes of lights and mediums and darks are going to be important there. And again, continue to make corrections on your work. Now, shading light values into my drawing with some hatching and cross hatching. It's going to help me make everything more accurate. There should only be a few places where there is light and no value. Only a few places. Everything else should have some value. Okay. After some time, you want to make sure that you really take your time and do the value shading as carefully as possible. You know, using a blending stump and using a pencil that is a little darker where it needs to be. Sharpen your pencils. And don't press too dark too quickly. Like I said, adding a little bit of shade at a time is going to improve your drawings. Okay.